Hi, and welcome to the Progressive Hub Show. My name is Jeffrey Sterling, a contributor at progressivehub.net. I'm really excited today to have a conversation with Reality Winner. Reality was a U.S. Air Force veteran, well, is a U.S. Air Force veteran and former NSA translator. In 2018, she was convicted of removing classified material from a government facility and mailing it to a news outlet. And she was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison as part of a plea. I'm not going to get into any specifics about the charges or anything. And she was released in 2021. Hi, Reality, and thank you so much for joining me. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks for having me.
Okay. I want to start off, and again, what I've been trying to do with these broadcasts on Progressive Hub is I want to let people know about whistleblowers. I mean, they're people, they're citizens, they're patriots as well. And to start off our conversation, I want to read a quote that you made shortly after. I think you may have still been in prison at this point, but you said, "I've had 4 years of just trying to say I'm not a terrorist. I can't even begin to talk about my actual espionage indictment or have a sense of accomplishment in having survived prison because I'm still stained by them accusing me of being the same as those I enlisted to fight against. So I don't let myself feel anything regarding the actual act or the charge until I can let it be known that I'm not what they said I was." Now, there's been some time past. You've been released from prison. You've been out of prison for a couple years now. Do you still have that same feeling?
I do, um, but a lot of it's just like facing like the internet trolls.
Mm,
Just because what an internet troll can say in a snide comment
yeah.
was actually taken as a fact in a federal courtroom. So it's a re-traumatization process as opposed
Mhm,
to some guy username stream of 10 numbers behind the name said something bad about me on Twitter.
mhm,
It's at one point in time, that was that was the truth about me. And that's what that courtroom allowed without rebuttal, without fact check. Um, so I don't really have that feeling anymore. I've been out and I've been very public about who I
mhm,
am. And we've had so much time to let people know exactly what I did that I've never shied away from.
mhm.
And I was guilty as charged. Um, so I've really taken back a lot of the narrative. And I think a lot of people have been able to see that, I don't justify what I did, but I also don't deny it. And I think that has given me a sense of legitimacy moving forward in my life.
Mhm. Yeah, I think those steps that you've taken are very commendable because I know when I was going through it, you brandished, whether you want to take pride in it or not, whistleblower, of course, the government calls it leakers, but the dialogue is always only controlled by the government. And so there's this skewed viewpoint of this individual who's been charged with violating the Espionage Act, charged with essentially, not essentially, but by law, being a traitor to the country. So I commend you on, you basically owned that and you turned it back around and used it to your benefit, to help you move on because I know how difficult it is, facing being accused of that. But and it's great that you've been able to, let your voice be known. Is there anything else more about you that, and without getting into any details about the act or what happened, that maybe is there something you can say about what you were thinking at the time? I mean, when you did that, I mean, did you feel like you were doing something to show that you were a traitor to the country?
Right, quite the opposite. I mean, I honestly, I was so young and naive and also completely ignorant about the legal threshold I was about to cross.
Mhm,
Um, my whole, as an adult, I was in the Air Force, had a clearance at the age of 21, all throughout the Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden cases and did not know a single thing about what they went through legally.
Hmm.
Like, you could not read about their case. And so I didn't understand that once you cross that line, there is no going back.
Yeah.
And it was not a matter of, oh, millions of people are going to see this information and see the value in it, and I'll be vindicated,
Hmm.
and they won't come down on me. It was, no matter what the information was, they were looking for someone like me who had committed this mistake.
Yeah.
And they wanted to hit that person as hard as possible. And I may as well have just, like, volunteered as tribute. Is
Yeah.
It was just really, it was a really naive act that
Hmm.
I thought people would value, and it was at the historically one of the worst times to do it. You know what I mean? It was like
Hmm.
during the Red Scare, basically.
Yeah. Well,
It
but
was
you
just
were,
really unfortunate timing to commit that felony.
yeah. I mean, but just speaking, I'm not trying to tell you what you were feeling at that time, but you certainly, I imagine you didn't feel that you were doing something to hurt your country. Again, I don't want you to get into any of the weeds of the charges or anything like that, but on a personal level, did you feel like I'm bringing my country down or anything? I mean, that may be a silly question, but you didn't
No,
feel that.
and I think one of the worst forms of irony is that, the media is still so interested in me. And since I've been able to speak since going on 60 Minutes, my first public
Mm,
interview, I have said that this was an act not against the United States government, but it was an act to save the people of the United States from partisan media.
mm,
And it was supposed to be their litmus test so that they could see the entire document, and then they could be like, oh, well, CNN or Fox News only gave me the top half.
mm,
They
mm.
only gave me this detail, but I'm clearly reading this other detail.
Yeah.
And it was for them, it was basically so people could see in real time what the media does when they get important government information, and what the media was brewing in our country in
Mm,
2016 and 2017, and that necessarily the government wasn't the enemy, that information wasn't being hidden. It had already been published by the government, just albeit very quietly.
mm.
And the just what the prosecution was able to do in that courtroom against me and my character, instead of just saying, like, she violated the law and she confessed to the FBI. um they made me the story.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's what happens. We actually, when Espionage Act charges are brought, we actually get away from the overall issue, and it turns into all about that individual. When I mean, you were saying earlier, you didn't know what you were getting into. I went to law school. I was a licensed attorney. Even I, sitting in jail, sitting in prison, like, what is this law they're throwing at me, and why are they able to essentially, as part of their evidence, just assassinate my character without me really being able to challenge it? So, you certainly weren't alone in that aspect. But, it's such a tremendous, I mean, just that feeling. It's like, you're charging me with what? I mean, that's what I went through. And that's what I'm feeling that you went through as well. Because I tell you, I saw what was unfolding with you. You were saying, when you did this act, it was during, this is in the wake of Snowden and other, Manning. It's like, you know what? I was sitting in prison watching your story unfold, and what was coming to mind with me was, wow, this millennial, has the bravery to come forward like this. At one point, I'm congratulating you, and the other, I'm dreading because I knew what you were about to go through with this. So that's something I think people don't understand and realize. Just one, being arrested is traumatic in itself, but for me, I was trying to serve my country. I was serving my country in the CIA. You were serving your country in the Air Force. How did that feel to be labeled through the charges a traitor against the country you're trying to serve?
It it the label was bad, and then the sinking realization, I mean, I'm sure you've been through it. I don't know what it felt like when you were in the courtroom, but for me, sitting in that stupid jumpsuit, shackled and silent, not understanding that everything I had seen about, like, courtroom and trials and those criminal justice shows is usually the defense gets to rebut things, and we weren't allowed to actually be like, "Your Honor, she's clearly not a terrorist." You're actually not allowed to do
Mhm,
that, and those comments have to be thrown out because they're not relevant.
mhm.
And it's really one of the only laws in the country where you don't have to establish criminal intent.
Yeah, it's
And it's really
amazing.
concerning to me, that we don't actually use it for espionage. 9 times out of 10, there's no country B. There's no secrets being sold.
No.
Um, it's it's really alarming that it's kind of like drug conspiracy laws. You know what I mean? It's how you get
Mm,
somebody without evidence.
yeah,
This
absolutely.
one is, you charge people for the wrong crime.
Mm. I've characterized the government use of the Espionage Act as a "we say so" law. We don't have to prove. Certainly don't have to prove harm. We don't have to prove, and we're not even going to let the person we're accusing really defend themselves. There's no
Right.
defense, but it's a "we say so" law. And for me, that was I was taken aback. I didn't learn. I mean, that's not the way I learned the law when I went to law school. That's not the way I understood the law, and especially the Constitution. But so now you're thrown into this system, and again, the jumpsuit. I really detested those jumpsuits. The handcuffs, the really separation from your family. And I believe you were denied bail twice, correct,
Yeah.
or several times. What does that feel like? Well, for me, it was like, what country am I in? It was a waking nightmare for me, being behind bars, something that I feared my entire life and tried to model my life to avoid. How did that feel for you?
It was surreal. Um, I had been in I had been survival mode for half my life against bulimia.
Mhm,
And I had finally, as a contractor, as someone with set hours, actually found myself in a place where I was structuring my life in a way where I thought I was going to beat it.
mhm.
And all of a sudden, you're thrown in a box with everything that exacerbates it.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I wasn't honestly, like, I say this time and time again, and people don't believe me, but the person least involved with my legal defense was me
That's
because
a very good point.
my only goal was every single day to survive bulimia.
Yeah.
And so when I reached my ultimate low in that jail, and it was like, it wasn't because of the legal charges. It wasn't because I was going to prison. It
Mhm.
wasn't because I hadn't hugged my mom. It wasn't any of that. It's too difficult. Like, it's no longer worth trying to survive this disease in these
Mhm.
conditions.
Yeah.
And the fact that there was no recourse for that, there was no relief for that. Um, I mean, the conditions alone, I mean, they're embarrassing to think that we put on average, what, 2.6 million Americans every single day are being detained in some capacity in this country.
Yes. Mhm.
And at any given point, they can be denied running water, toilet tissue, air conditioning. For me, food that was, within my religious beliefs.
Mhm.
I mean, I was denied that pretty much my entire incarceration.
Yeah.
And that we just do it and we say people deserve that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I mean,
it's perpetual punishment.
it's so bad.
Yeah. I mean, and it's like we're going to make an
Yeah,
example
and
of you.
then they're like, "Oh, the conditions aren't the punishment."
Yeah.
You know? The
it
conditions aren't supposed to be the punishment. The conditions aren't supposed to be the deterrent,
mhm.
but they are.
Yeah, what do they call the prisons? Correctional institutions. For me, what was the correction? Denying healthcare, horrible living conditions.
Right.
I mean, how is that supposed to be a correction? I think you made a very strong point that the one person not involved in your defense, not involved in it, was you. It's a dehum. You're no longer a human. You're like persona non grata once you're charged with that. I mean, one thing that I felt I was going through when these charges were levied upon me and I was arrested, just this incredible feeling of loneliness, of being alone, because this was so, as you said, surreal. There are people who support. I mean, certainly, your mom, she's been outstanding and had been outstanding for you and still is, I'm sure. For me, my wife. So, but there's still that feeling of, wow, nobody else knows what this is like. How could anybody else know what this is like? Did you go through that? Going through this experience?
You know, no, because, it was so unique. I was so alone before all of this. Like, I really
Mm,
wasn't, I don't claim mental health issues caused with a felony, but I was an extreme introvert. I didn't know how to have friends or relationships. And I lived alone with my cat and
mhm,
foster dog. And for the first time, I'm living with other people probably since basic training.
mhm,
And, you know, they, they didn't understand my charges,
mhm.
but once they understood, they were like, "Oh, you didn't actually do anything that we would consider wrong."
Yeah.
And I'm looking at them like, "You didn't do anything wrong either. Like, addiction is not a crime."
Yeah.
And so we had that mutual respect of like, we're all victims in this room except for some legitimately bad assholes that you were
Mm,
going to find along the way.
yeah.
And so we all had that kind of feeling of like, we all deserve better.
Mhm.
And the fan mail that I was getting was like, I mean, mail call was a disaster because it was like I would get 30 letters a day of people from around the world pledging solidarity. Like I had never, when I had never spoken to my mother so much. I mean, we talked every day and I would call my supporters every day. And I had never, I mean, honestly, like my first birthday party as an adult was my
Mm.
first December in jail. I had always spent my birthdays alone at the gym because that's the only place I'm comfortable.
Yeah.
And there we were, twerking and laughing, and we actually made it one of the officers play music on the intercom. And, I
Wow.
was like, do I have friends? Like, so I had always been alone. And for the first time, I understood what it meant like to be in a group of people.
Mhm. Yeah.
It
Sometimes I
changed my
think
life.
sometimes I think it takes an incredible ordeal. I think for you then to see what your strengths are and what that you do, that you're not alone. I certainly learned that while I was there. Mail call, same experience that you had. It's just incredible. Um, so and then being released from prison. I've okay. Well, let me step back a second. So you're in prison. What did the term? How did the Could you identify? Were you identifying yourself with the term whistleblower at all? Because, for me, I was struggling with that. I was like, well, I was whistleblowing about an operation I was involved in. I was whistleblowing about um, discrimination at the CIA, but I'm sitting here in prison. It's like, well, how, and why should I be in prison for doing the right thing? So it was hard for me to kind of gel with that term, considering where I was and what had happened. Did you have that same feeling?
No, I mean, I had such a sense of humor about it.
You
I
have
was
to.
always introduced as the Russian spy. I was always introduced as special forces girl, and it was just like I'm so passive aggressive that makes me like laugh inside.
Mm,
Um, and then when people were like, "But what did you do, really? Like, what? Why? Like, why was that information so bad?" And I'm like, I committed the worst crime imaginable. I embarrassed the government, and that's all it was, and I said, "I can't tell you what it was about." I know about jailhouse snitches, so I'm like, "I'm not going
Mhm.
into that."
Yeah.
Um, but they didn't like it just because it was embarrassing,
Yeah.
and that's it, you know what I mean? You don't like it
Mhm.
when someone airs out your shit. Um,
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so that was how I was able to communicate it to people, like, why I was being treated so severely, and a lot of people already knew, like, I started a lot of shit all the time with the
Mhm.
officers, with human rights, and people knew I could get people attorneys or I could do their legal work for them. And so people kind of just like, you talk back to the government. Like, they just don't like you. Like,
Yeah.
I've had officers, call me out in front of the whole unit, like, God damn it, Winter, stop fucking trying to save people. You
Yeah.
ain't here to help nobody,
Yeah.
shit like that. And it just, like, people got it. They understood.
Yeah.
It wasn't about whistleblowing or politics. It was just, here's somebody that knows how to talk back, and they don't like
Mhm.
that.
Well, I think all of this has revealed a character trait in you that you stand up. I mean,
Yeah,
you see something and you try to correct something. I mean, I think that is very commendable, and I think a lot of people don't get that sense, of course, leading up to everything, because again, the government controls everything about what's coming out about you under these charges. But they conveniently leave out the part that you're doing the right thing. You're still serving your country. And as we close out here, there's one thing I want to ask. We've been through similar ordeals. I mean, no one can go through the same ordeal, but I wanted to know from you, if you're willing to share this, what does it feel like seeing that the former president whose administration charged you with violating the Espionage Act is himself being charged with violating that same law? I mean, how has that felt to you?
I just, you know, until I see the transcripts or the emails where um, Donald Trump himself wanted Reality Winner to suffer,
Mhm.
um, what I know is that the Department of Justice charged both of us.
Okay.
And he certainly mishandled classified information. Um, but just like in my case with my document, I know the Department of Justice was able to say, like, these 3 pages could have ended the country. And
Mm.
so I was very interested that they kind of did like an itemized receipt in
Yeah.
his indictment. And they gave like a brief summary of every item.
Mm.
Um, but I'm also cynical enough to wonder if the description is literally what the document said. And
Yeah.
they're saying, like, this is top secret because it said X, blah, 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 X country. It literally could have been that, right? They're not going to
Yeah.
give us the
Yeah.
documents. They're not going to let we, the people, see our information that was compromised. I
Mhm.
do believe that by now the CIA and NSA and DIA and whatever military branches whose information was compromised, I do believe they know by
Mhm.
now who has seen it outside of the former president. I
Absolutely.
do believe they know the tangible results. Um, will they testify in court along with the DOJ? Will they publicly state how vulnerable they were made? Were lives lost? Will
Mm.
they come out and say that? Because the CIA is not going to say that.
Well, and actually,
And
by the Espionage Act, none of them have to say anything. The
and they
government doesn't have
don't.
to prove harm. So,
And they could have just been a bunch of whitewashed memos
yep.
that he thought looked really cool. And the
Mhm.
problem is that under this law, that doesn't matter. But what I was interested in is that his indictment was actually written for we, the public, to read it
Mhm.
and understand what an indictment under the Espionage Act 793E actually means.
Yeah.
It's one of the first ones that actually defines what national defense information is, because it's not
Mhm.
necessarily classified information.
Yeah.
And it's one of the first ones that really lays out the intent behind it and the steps behind it, and the fact that he coerced or had cooperation from a co-defendant.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I
I,
also,
yeah.
yeah, I mean,
No, go
it's
ahead. I mean, I think it's also that given the way the Espionage Act has been used uh, with you, Manning, Daniel Hale, John Kiriakou, I think given the situation with Mr. Trump, they had to charge him with violating espionage. I mean, government can charge whatever it wants, but
yeah,
it shows that act, which is essentially again a we say so law. So for me, I wonder the only question left, because they don't have to prove harm, they don't have to show him, they don't really don't have to show him the evidence that they have
right.
against him. So my wonder is what how much time is he going to get in prison? That should be the eventual end to this, whether it's a plea or it goes to trial. But we'll see. I mean, is this an instance of the same justice system that prosecuted you and me? Is it going to be the same one, especially with regard to the Espionage Act being used against Donald Trump?
But
I
I'm
guess
so
yet to be
interested in
seen.
like the power differential, that
Yeah.
you and I had against the DOJ, and that Donald Trump and his 70 million supporters have. He might be the first person to get a fully public, transparent trial,
Yeah.
at least for the documents. And I mean, if the documents don't get him, I mean, there's no getting out of the obstruction and conspiracy charges. I
Or
think
so
that's
we
where the
think.
downfall is. I don't think it's going to be the documents.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, I imagine he's going to be able to plead. They're going to offer a lesser charges somehow to him. And the thing is, from my experience and knowledge, with the Espionage Act, they really don't have to. They've charged them. They can. That's the home. They've made the home run shot. So they've done the Hail Mary already, and there is no defense against the Espionage Act. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
He might be the first. I'm
I
kind of optimistic that we're going to get a really good legal precedent
yeah.
for the next leaker. Thank you. That's,
Possibly,
you know,
possibly. I mean, I mine was a public trial. Yet I think it was on display also how one-sided Espionage Act prosecutions are. But yeah, we'll see. And it is really shocking, that someone, like you said, on that level is being charged with the same law that we were charged with. So it's just fascinating and sad in, in a way as well. But as we close out, and as you said, you have been able to speak out, and there have been movies, live action plays, I think, based on your story. So your story is out there. Is there anything else that you feel you'd like people to know about you, reality winner?
I mean, that's the most important thing is from the day the FBI showed up, I took responsibility. I
Mhm.
womaned up and said, yep, I did that. And this is why. And I made my case right then and there. And it
Yeah.
should have stopped at that. I was guilty as
Mhm.
charged the day the FBI showed up. Um, and I've seen the worst that our system can do, and I've seen the profit being made off of the bodies of our people being confined.
Yes.
And um, it's only made, it's only increased the fire inside of me. Like, I'm not hiding,
Mhm.
you know. A lot of other people, they want protection for whistleblowers and leakers, and or they want the Espionage Act reformed. And I want Snowden to come home. I know he wants to come
Yeah.
home to a fair trial. For
Yeah.
me, I'm thinking a little bigger than that. My goal now is to abolish prisons in the United States,
Yes.
because if they can't use them right, then they don't get to use them at all. You
Absolutely.
know,
I agree
it's
with
not
you on that.
making our society safer or better, and it is modern day slavery, even without and that's what people don't understand. It's not the labor. All
Mhm.
right, we don't got people working in fields. That's not what this is about.
Yeah.
It's about the fact that you're commoditizing everything that they do in a building while you keep them confined, And that's making billions of dollars of profits off your tax dollars, off my tax dollars, off of our income while we make in there that's taxed.
Yeah.
And it's an industry and they got to keep the bodies in there. That's why even during a global pandemic, they didn't let none of us out
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they had to keep the profit going. That's why it's just for people to understand that if we aren't locking people up to stop them from killing people. You know what I'm saying? By the time we find them, they've already been killed somebody.
Yeah.
And so it's a reaction to that. And that most people, I mean, the most honest person, I don't know if you know, like in prison, but the most honest people were the murderers. And if
Hmm.
you ask them, are you going to do it again? They're like, hell no, this shit sucks. Like,
Yeah.
I want to go home. I made a mistake.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
if it's a
and what was the
correction
point of you?
center,
What was the point of you going to prison? There was no way possible you could have ever done whatever they alleged you had. There's no way you could have done that again. So, what was the point of you going to prison, other than
yeah,
uh, the message and throw you into that system from one system to another?
yeah,
It's horrifying. Horrifying.
yeah, it was the worst thing they could have done because I'm going to fight it forever, and I'm going to free everybody.
Yeah.
They picked the wrong one.
But I'll tell you, that's how I'd like to end this. You're fighting, and I think from the beginning to the end, you're a fighter, and I thank you for the efforts that you put, the fight that you have put forth, and and you're also demonstrating that going through this, maybe you find another purpose, and yours is fighting against prisons. I'm trying to do some efforts with that as well, and it's amazing where life takes you, but I am really thankful and grateful that you've come on. Again, thank you for the service that you have uh, done and that you continue to do for our country. I think you're still serving our country, and I think that's very commendable. So thank you so much for coming on Progressive Hub Show.
No, thank you so much for existing. I'm so grateful for you. I am.
Thank you. All right. Take care.